Welcome to Coleman Report Live. I'm Bob Coleman. We're talking Main Street, the small business lenders who help it grow. Lance Sexton, thank you for joining us. Katie Roach, thank you very much. Look, we respect your time. We thank you for your support. So let's get to it. First of all, ask your questions. Lance did a great webinar yesterday, and Lance, we're going to hold some of those questions over so people can get a taste of what you did. There's a certificate. Please download those and track those for your HR and audit purposes. Katie did a wonderful job on this PPP forgiveness guide, and Katie, we're going to sell your product. We're capitalists here. We're going to sell that with the link to Lance's webinar yesterday. And Katie, what is it, about 50 pages? And also what's neat about this in today's technology, we have the date up there October 15th. We will be updating that is in real time. So that'll be good. And for all of those, we had all of those on the webinar yesterday. We had about 50 people. Whenever we update it, we're going to automatically send you a copy, so you don't have to worry about anything. Very good. Okay, let's go to the poll questions. Have you reported PPP loan fraud to the Inspector General? What's your personal answer, Lance?
I have not. Did not have any loan fraud, and I touched a pretty substantial number of PPP loans.
About 10% of the industry. Yeah, the procedure is, Lance, go through it real quick. What's the procedure if you think something fishy is happening?
Well, just go to your new SOP 5010-6. In the back is all of the relevant emails for SBA, including the Inspector General. If you suspect loan fraud on a PPP loan, send an email with the appropriate information, the PPP loan number, some details about what caused you to think there was loan fraud, and they will inspect it, obviously, and get back with you on that.
Yeah, is that I always get confused about this. Is that mandated? Are we absolutely required to do that? Are we being good citizens? Are we being cautious? What's the storyline?
There's some parts of the SOP that does talk about reporting any potential SBA loan fraud. I don't know that there's an absolute requirement, but in being a good SBA citizen, never heard that used before, Bob, SBA citizen, you should suspect fraud. Now, I will say in going through applications, there was a circumstance where I did see something that was not quite right. We didn't process the application. So, the good thing about SBA loan fraud is if you're doing your work diligently, you can prevent it by not processing.
Good SBA citizen. We're gonna let's get goodsbacitizen.com. All right. I don't know why we're asking this, and we don't mean to embarrass anybody, but have you done it, Lance? Have you done it? I will confess, I have not. I've contacted the staff, but I've not contacted my individual congressperson. And
Bob,
very good. I like the response. Good for all of you.
Bob, I have had the opportunity to reach out to a couple of my congressional representatives about simplified forgiveness, and I had a nice post on LinkedIn that got about 5,000 views, and I tagged some congressmen.
Katie, have you?
Well, I'm not as involved in it, but I've definitely been kind of following some of the trade groups and things like that have been really reaching out. Unfortunately, I'm not a lender or a borrower, so I don't fit their criteria.
A concerned SBA good citizen, so that's
right. So
that's right.
It's good to know that these are that there are some forms out there. There's some form letters. I know when Chris is on, he always suggests take those form letters and adjust them a little, or even better, reach out, call them, leave a message, things like that, because a lot of people are still pushing for that $150,000 simplified forgiveness. So I think
especially if your senator or congress person is on the small business committee. If they're not on the small, go ahead.
She's got to be a SGC. You know, SBA likes acronyms. The SBA Good Citizen, SGC. It's Friday.
Finally, we'd love to ask this question. What were we at the other day, Katie? 49%? I know
Yeah.
for the first time we had more yes than no's, but I think it was 49%. So.
Yeah, so
But
earlier
yes,
this week we were hovering at around 40, and then our last poll, I believe yesterday, was 49%, so almost half of the respondents.
Whoa, there we go.
There we go. Now
where
we're
we
at
edging it.
Very good. So Katie, what's this letter that we got from SBA about the forgiveness platform?
So this letter was included actually on the platform. So if you wanted to download it, it was available there. I believe we've also put it in the handouts. It just goes over some of the smaller changes that they've done to the platform. Most of them are to make it more compatible with the 3508S. They also, they included additional interest accrual method. Lenders can now update their primary bank contact within the platform. They of course are planning on fully implementing the 3508S by Monday, October 19th. They've added several additional export capabilities for the payment dashboard and the all submissions screen to make tracking it a little bit easier and efficient. And they're also reminding people that the EIDL advance information is available on the platform for submitted decisions. So you can now check that and make sure that all of that is correct.
We should ask the question, Lance, do you still use the 360 interest accrual method? Does anybody do that these days?
You know, some do. That's different different banks use different accrual methods, but majority will use. You're talking about the 365 or the 3365?
The 360. You know, we calculated interest over 360, which is better, which is more income for the lender and less for the anyway. That's ancient history, but the SB still allows it. The reason why we cover these stories on fraud is because these stories directly affect the go one more, Joe. There you go. These stories directly affect the ongoing welfare of the business. And I've preached this before, and I'll preach it again, is I had a professor in my MBA school who said, as long as you're a privately held company, do not give up authority over signing the checks. That's something that you should do as the entrepreneur. And here's another one, Lance, $800,000.
Bob, in my 8 years of small business ownership, the only name that ever appeared on the check was mine.
Yeah, well, my wife figured out very quickly that she gets to sign also. I think Michael figured that out also. But it's all in the family. But these are serious situations that can definitely impact the health of the small business, Katie.
Right. In this particular case, I think one of the red flags I saw was this man was a part-time office manager. So he was only making about $500 a week doing this job. And when he's handling money and things like that, that's starting to look real tempting when he's able to write these checks to himself. In this particular case, he wrote himself over $751,000 in checks. That's 500 or so checks in total that he wrote to himself, forging the owner's name on all of them. He also went into the corporate credit cards, started using those, and to hide all of that, of course, he changes the names on all these accounts. So all of the statements and things like that were coming to him. In fact, he even...
What was the name of his fake company? What was it? Was that the shot?
Well, he has two companies on the side, and none of the documents I read, I went through the indictment, none of it really said whether they were fake or not, so I don't want to presume that, but he was funneling a lot of this into his own businesses. And even on one of the filings to the Florida Secretary of State, he made himself treasurer of his boss's business, so that he was getting all the documents for that as well.
It's just,
Wow.
Yeah, go ahead, Lance.
Small business owners need to have a handle on the checkbook, the money coming in and going out. And, if you have it's okay to have an employee, a CFO, a bookkeeper, but at the end of the day, they need to be looking at what's going in and what's going out of the business. And I can't imagine letting $1 million in transactions go in a small business. That's significant.
Well, I think former Administrator Linda McMahon said it best, and she said, what advice would you give small business? Watch your cash flow like a hawk. So,
Yeah.
Okay, very good. ICBA is still pushing for blanket forgiveness for loans under 150. We don't know if that's going to happen, but I know behind the scenes people are working on that. And before we talk about some questions, Katie, what's going on across the pond?
So a couple weeks ago, we were talking about the UK's bounce back loan program, and a quick little summary about that. That's not quite like our program. It's actually just kind of regular loans. They're not forgivable, but there is a period of time where they will not have to pay on those loans. I believe it's about a year. So they've got a little bit of a time before they have to start paying back these loans. Unfortunately, it's both on high risk of fraud and high risk of default rate because of the way these loans were processed. Like our program, they were allowed to rely on self-certifications, but unfortunately, they really didn't have to look into it any further. So a lot of these criminals were stealing people's information, going online, sometimes even purchasing their personal information, and submitting documents to get one of these loans when in fact they were not related to the business at all. And of course, then they would be approved because nobody was really being forced to look at it any further. So there's really high risk of fraud, and the UK is now implementing something called the COVID Crime Stoppers Hotline, which is going to end up costing them, I believe, over £100,000 just to make sure that people are able to warn the important people about what's going on, if they've noticed anything, because of course they're going to end up paying for all of this, and they're going to end up on the line as taxpayers because of all of these defaults and all of this fraud.
The reason why we cover this story is just to put things into context, Lance, let people know that, hey, the fraud that we're experiencing PPP is not, we don't own fraud. The rest of the world has these same situations. They're going to lose billions of pounds. But I just love these stories. I love bounce back loan program. I love the UK and how they come up with their terminology. Okay, let's go to the 3508. Lance, go ahead. I'm going to let you go.
Well, I think that any SBA PPP forgiveness requires a review by the bank when they receive the application. It's a good faith review. I think you do need to verify average monthly payroll costs, but we're relying on certifications, especially on the 3508S. On the 3508S, there's no calculation page. It's a forgiveness amount. Basically you put in your name, business name, address, identifying tax number, email address, phone number, and then you put the PPP loan amount, PPP loan number, and then you put the forgiveness amount. But there's not a calculation chart like there is in the EZ or the 3508. So, and then there's a group of certifications, and one of the certifications that the borrower makes is a properly calculated payroll. But you're still required to receive proof of payroll, proof of non-payroll expenses, including mortgage, interest, utilities, and rent. You need to take and make a good faith review of the documents received and just make sure the numbers make sense.
What about we have a borrower who does payroll internally. They don't use a service. How do we verify that?
Well, typically, in all three of the forgiveness forms, 3508, 3508EZ, and 3508S, all talk about the documents that are necessary to prove payroll. If they use a third-party payroll firm, you can use third-party payroll firm's report. If not, you need a payroll report and a IRS 941 or the equivalent state form included in the documentation.
Yeah, so the borrower's books are fine, is what you're saying. We don't need to have that independent third party. Okay. On the 3508S, it does not have an end date for the covered period since the borrowers have to submit documentation that we have to review. Should we assume the maximum period for all borrowers is 24 weeks?
Well, not necessarily, but it is interesting that 3508S doesn't talk about the covered period. You can't automatically assume it's either going to be 8 or 24 weeks, but if you are going to a default, it would be the 24-week covered period.
Lance, we had a bunch of questions on the forms. We have a 3508S, we have a 3508EZ, we have a regular 3508. When do we use what? And if we use the first question is, can we use the 3508 on everything? And the second question is, when do we use what?
Well, and we talked about it on the webinar yesterday. On loans under 50, you're going to use 3508S. On a large majority of the remaining loans, you would use the 3508EZ. Only the largest and most complicated, the 3508EZ is appropriate in most circumstances if there was not a 25% reduction in payroll or a 25% reduction in full-time equivalents. Virtually everyone else can use that 3508EZ. And there'll be a few that use the 3508. Now, one of the questions on the webinar yesterday was if somebody who had a PPP loan under $50,000 had already submitted a 3508EZ, do they have to go back and do the 3508S? And the answer is no. 3508EZ is fine.
Becky says we still are calculating interest accrual based on 3360, but they're changing it for all their future renewals. Russell asked the question, what do you think the payment term should be after a partial forgiveness?
Well, I think the payment should be calculated based on the remaining term of the note. And this is something, Bob, we talked about yesterday. We've gotten plenty of information about how to originate a PPP loan. We've gotten plenty of information about forgiveness. Hopefully there will be some information that SBA releases about the servicing of the remaining balance of the PPP loan, because there will be some challenges in the servicing. You're going to have balances, especially those that are 2-year deals. If they, right now the payments are deferred 10 months, basically you're going to have a 1-year loan left. And depending on what the non-forgiven balance is, it could be a pretty sizable payment for that borrower. So there will be some servicing challenges, Bob, even on the 5-year term and a bigger PPP loan. If a percentage of it's not forgiven, it may result in a pretty sizable payment. So right now, I would assume servicing would be according to the 5057, current 5057-2, or whatever servicing SOP if they release the new one. But I still think we're going to get some guidance on. I think we'll get some guidance on servicing the remaining balances. The other thing, Bob, that's interesting is the remaining balances are 100% guaranteed SBA loans. But how do you submit for guaranteed payment if that borrower defaults on that remaining balance of the PPP loan? Anybody who's ever done a PDK knows the 10-tab package doesn't fit a PPP loan.
Real quick, Russell makes the comment that if the payroll records are less than 8 weeks and are provided, shouldn't 8 weeks be assumed? If we're showing all the documentation, I think the answer is yes. Is that?
I think Russell's correct there.
And Levi, I appreciate this, Levi. Levi is wrapping up our discussion on fraud, and it's something we should have said, but he says to stress this, the person or people writing the checks should never control the books. In a small business owner's case, it's almost advisable the owner control the checkbooks and make an effort to understand each transaction. And
Absolutely.
I know, I think when you're out there, I know I get a daily email from my bank on what my transactions are. So I think that's fine. Real quick, I want to, Lance, give a plug for your webinar next week.
Bob, we're going to talk about servicing loans that are delinquent. Any SBA loan. It could be a PPP loan. It could be a 7A loan. It could be a 504. But we're going to talk about the steps you can take as a good SBA citizen, Bob, to properly service an SBA loan that's delinquent. And I encourage everyone to sign up because, as we all know, the CARES Act payments have ended and the economy's in a tough spot. So there's going to be some delinquent servicing required on SBA loans. So learn the proper techniques.
I think you're also going to talk about what happens if we don't have forgiveness, because technically they're delinquent. And so how do we turn that out and what do we do as well? Correct, Lance?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah, all right. Well, you're going to be busy. Hey, as I said at the beginning, we know you're busy. Thank you for your time. Please keep your questions coming. Lance and Katie, always enjoy it. And thank you for joining us today for Coleman Report Live and for supporting America's Main Street, one entrepreneur at a time.
Have a great weekend.